Hey, welcome to PW Farrell's bass lessons. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Instead of doing the usual format where I play a song, show you how to play that song, I'm just going to very quickly talk about practice. A lot of students, let me just fix that camera. A lot of students, want to understand how to organise their practice. Now, the way I understand it is, from experience, for me, there's two different phases that you go through as a musician, and sometimes you switch between them. But what I'm going to be talking about is the developmental stage. So when you're still sort of getting all the tools together. And the best way of organising that practice phase is through something I call partitioned practice. That's when you divide different elements of music into different categories and isolate them, practice them one at a time. Something else that you'll encounter naturally and organically is this kind of sort of natural exploration and development of an area, or an extrapolation of an area. Say, for example, if you've already been playing for quite a while and you suddenly discover Brazilian music, and then you discover you get into the Partido Alto, or however I always pronounce it wrong, but you get into all these different rhythms and you extrapolate them and you make things based on that, and you can focus on one area. You can afford to do that because you've already built the tools together that you need to be a good musician. But what I want to talk about today is the developmental phase. And the cool thing about these concepts is you can then go back and use them later on. If you find you're getting rusty, or there's most musicians I know who are great players maintain some sort of partition practice in their playing. So the reason why I approach it this way is because I remember when I was starting out, just being overwhelmed with how much work I had to do to be the player I wanted to be. And the only way I could think of organising it was into these massive, big areas. I divided all of music into 4 areas: time, theory, sight reading, and technique. Now, obviously there's overlap. So when I say theory can mean language, theory can mean transcription, anything that is helping you learn the language. So really, another name for that could be language. So we could say language, particularly because I'm interested in improvising in a jazz harmonic arena. Time can be groove, pocket, feel, form, phrasing, all these things, but that's time. Technique can be manufacturing new techniques, so learning some technique for the first time. It can be the warm-up phase of the practice, etc. And sight reading really speaks for itself. But there's overlap there too, because you could be reading exercises for the other area, and you know that that's also covering the sight reading thing. First thing you've got to do is get settled. So whenever I play my bass, in performance or in practice, I have a ritual. I settle myself, I sit down, I get mentally and physically loose, and then I always put the strap on first. I let the strap sit, and this is based on a ritual I've done tens of thousands of times, so I sort of automatically adopt the right headspace, pick my bass up and put it on. The very first thing that you're going to have to do then when it comes to playing is get a sound you dig. Try to find a sound in the room that's going to work for you. So I would play long tones, just like a trumpet or your brass instrument would. And once you've found a sound that's close enough to what is usable, you need to mentally just settle on it. Now I like basses that have a passive tone knob on them. I find that the tone knob's a good way of, it's kind of like a safety net. You can usually get a workable sound when you wind the treble back using a tone knob in just about any room. So that's why I love this bass. I've got 7 instruments, but it's pretty much the MTD all the way, and I've also got a Mexican P bass, funnily enough, that is also great sounding just out of the box. So the first thing I would probably do after tuning up is go into the technique. So once again, using these 4 split quadrants, I would be dividing your time evenly. So if you've got an hour, spend 15 minutes on each. If you've got 4 hours, spend an hour on each. So the first thing we're going to do is warm up, okay, and that's part of the technical component. So just incrementally, you're going to be starting with your right hand, and you're going to be getting it as loose as possible. Now, a lot of great bass players never sort of develop that next gear in their facility because they never truly look at playing with loose, relaxed hands. You can really take it to a point where your knuckles are actually all flexing and that loose. And I would start from that extreme and then develop your tone, introduce and maintain musicality through that. But you want to explore playing as relaxed as possible. I've found these days that my touch is slightly harder than it used to be back in the day because I prefer it that way, but I still have the looseness of how I used to play. And also my touch is probably still a lot softer than a lot of dudes, but it's just, I want to be able to have those sorts of dynamics in my playing. Okay, so a good exercise will just be pairs of notes on each string. Remember to rake as you come down. And the left hand is just involved in muting the strings as you descend across the neck. And once that's loose, you can do some variations. Speed up. In polyrhythms. Etc. Then we'll add the left hand. So we'll just start with pairs of chromatic notes going across the neck again. Actually, I would really do most of my chromatic exercises starting on the 5th fret, just to keep the spacing a bit more comfortable and manageable. So. That would morph into a 4-finger thing. That would morph into some sort of permutation exercise where you alternate the orders of your fingers. Etc. Then that would morph into something with more string crossing involved. So then what you can do, which a lot of dudes don't seem to appreciate, is you don't need mountains of material. You don't need mountains of stuff to practice. You can just extrapolate new nuggets from the materials you've already got. Make new exercises out of your current ones. So for example, we can start bleeding into these other areas. So if I'm in technique at the moment, maybe I'll start morphing into the time, and I'll probably keep it to the clock. So I'll be like, okay, well, we're now 30 minutes, let's get into time. Rather than starting with a completely new thing, we can take this thing that we're already doing, which I think I'll post some PDFs of it. This is an exercise I use a lot. But we can take an exercise like that and we can accent different points in the 16th notes to get more comfortable with 16th notes. So we could accent each one. Or every second one. We can do polyrhythms. We could accent every third note, right? So there's groups of 4, but you'll end up doing this 4-on-3 polyrhythm. So, if you listen to a great player like Gary Willis, the dynamics throughout his playing make his playing. Like that's, apart from the fact that his lines are incredibly inventive and non-repetitious, it's the accents in his grooves and the accents in his soloing that really makes it work. So from a technical point of view, you want to get comfortable, be able to switch between playing very light, like pianissimo, to double forte, and a lot of bass players don't explore that. They don't explore being able to play fluidly softly and being able to play fluidly loud. So yeah, now we're in the land of time. So, you know, for the next 30 minutes you'll be looking at different aspects of time. So just then you looked at the 16th subdivision. There's a few ways you can work on subdivisions. You can also take an exercise and have the click represent different 16th notes in the bar. So normally it would just be the beat, right? So you'd be like taka-dimi, 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 taka-dimi. But if you put in a bar of a beat of 3, and then you can have the whole thing displaced by 1/16th note. Taka-dimi, 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 taka. I'm even accenting it like that, so I'm not really taka-dimi, 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 taka-dimi. You can have the click represent the offbeat. The last one. And you can do the same thing with a shuffle. So you could play like just a shuffle feel. Then you can have the click be the offbeat. You could have the click be the last triplet. So you could have the click be the last triplet of every beat. And of course the other thing with time is practicing tempo, practicing holding pocket. And it's interesting because you'll notice how I'm sort of dovetailing each of these areas with something which is going to blend and merge into the next topic. So time can then blend and merge into the theory section. If we start practicing scales, we could practice scales over a very slow pulse, say 25 beats per minute. So that's slow, right? So let's play linear scales. That's something that I'd get my students to do straight away. So once they've learned basic patterns, we'll get them playing linear scales so that they're not stuck to a pattern and they're thinking about the actual note placement up and down the neck, because they've got to learn the neck. Just like when you look at a piano and you can see where all the notes are, you want to be looking at a bass guitar and seeing just where all the notes are straight away. So that'd be something like so I'm playing the C major scale just up and down the G string, okay, at 25 beats a minute. Rush, and so notice when you're rushing and dragging, and just fix it. You could double the time if you wanted. So yeah, you can develop that aspect of the time and that will see you slowly merging into the theory section, right, where we're practicing scales. So yeah, I'm a big fan of doing scales in non-pattern ways while you're really getting to learn the instrument. So because if you think about it, if you're using patterns for scales, you're really just kind of learning licks, and there's probably way hipper melodic devices to be memorizing pattern-wise than just an octave scale. Obviously, I've practiced a ton of scales, and obviously that's something that everyone should do. I'm just saying, think about the reasoning behind why you're doing these things. So, for example, on that point, people often have trouble once they get out of positions. So, for example, if you do arpeggios, if you're practicing four-note chord arpeggios, so say for example in the key of C major, if I was to go C major 7, and then D minor 7, so these are just chords diatonic to the key of C major. What you'll find is people will automatically default to that classic thing of, oh, if it's a major scale, I start with the second finger. If it's a minor scale, I start with the first finger. You know. But obviously there's other ways to play these arpeggios. Again, I just sort of looked at it and I said, well, pretty much there's two main ways to play any chordal arpeggio. There's what I would call a closed pattern. So for example, in C, you go C with the second finger, then E with the first finger, G with the fourth finger, B with the third finger. Or you can go open, which would be C with the ring finger, E with the third finger, C with the fourth finger, E with the third finger, G with the first finger, and B with the fourth finger. So you sort of, in the same way that you look at the whole thing and divide it into four manageable things, you can then kind of simplify and make some rules to quantify these different nuances of the materials. So I would practice arpeggios like that. So I go closed position, open position. Same with the D minor. I could go closed position, open position, closed position, open position, and just do that for all of them. I'll go into more details for all this stuff later. I wanted something that I could show my students to explain to them how to organise their practice. So that's why this video is going so fast. Okay, so closed, open, closed, open, closed, open. So yeah, you're blasting through the theory aspect. The theory aspect is also, it's more about language. It's more about finding the tools to speak. So in the formative stages, you might be just practicing scales and stuff, but you should also then start practicing transcribing and listening and learning little bits of solos and stuff that you've transcribed. So that brings me over to something else I wanted to talk about, which is reading. Reading actually probably can work well going before the theory section, because when you're reading stuff, that's when you'll often come across little melodic devices that you really dig and you want to extrapolate. When I was sort of doing reading practice when I was doing a lot of this partition practice, I got a hell of a lot out of practicing the Charlie Parker Omni book. So the Charlie Parker Omni book is just a bunch of transcriptions. I think it's a Hal Leonard thing, or maybe Abersold actually. This one's missing its covers. You know it's been used, it hasn't got any covers. I think it might be Abersold, but anyway, the Charlie Parker Omni book. It's just a collection of Charlie Parker's recordings. So they've transcribed the heads and the solos, and on this material in the bebop age, most of these heads are solos that got repeated so much that they sort of became the new heads, or I think a lot of them were probably deliberately sat down and written, but they're sort of reimaginings of different melodies over chords that already existed from the standards repertoire of the swing era. So, what I would do is I'd take something like the Omni book, which is a bunch of sax licks that are played usually really fast, and I would slow it down, and that way you can use it as groove pocket practice too. You should practice sight reading two ways. Practice sight reading literally, so that means literally, like literally, I don't know why I was suddenly from Brooklyn. Sight read literally what's written. So if it's a quarter note, play the whole quarter note and then just stop right on the rest. Practice that way, and then also practice then being able to put your own personality and expression into it. You'll find on most gigs, well, not on most gigs, but on a lot of gigs, they actually prefer the player that can make it sound like they're playing it for the first time. So that means not playing it literally. It means having a few little bass player things in there. I'll show you what I mean. This is literal. 2, 3, 4. Same head, not being literal. Might even muck around with my phrasing. Probably wouldn't change the rhythm like that though. Okay, let's go on to the bridge. 3, 4, 1. It's a bit of a swing thing there. Okay, you get the idea. Now, the reason why I said you could probably put this before the language section is because on this Parker stuff, when you start playing through the solos, you'll come across all these really, well, they're cliches, so I don't want to say they're hip, but they are hip. They're cliches because they're hip. So let's play through. I'll play through the solo. 2, 3, 4. So it sounds funny because it's so slow, like jazz Nazis would be freaking out. That was pretty cool. Anyway, you get the idea. That 16th note thing earlier was pretty cool though. That was pretty cool. So what I'd probably do is I'd take something like that. 2, 3, 4. 1. Okay, and I'd isolate it. I would take something like that. 2, 3, 4. And what you can do is you can speed it up, obviously, and sort of jam on it, like make out, like almost play pretend that you're on a gig and, you know, seeing how this line works in different genres and stuff. So then you can start trying to blend it into your own melodic ideas. And then the big one, and this is something that I'm really big on, is take it through different key centers. something I've done is I've actually written out Charlie Parker Omnibook pieces into Finale, which is a notation program I have, and then just transposing it. So read entire Parker solos, and what I'll usually do is I'll transpose it to C major, because, you know, then that's the least sharps and flats, and, you know, even after all these years, I still find my brain is more like, oh, and then you move it in and out of keys. Anyway, so that was a full speed, like no depth, just a quick explanation of how you should organise your practice when you're starting out, man. Just divide it, or woman, you just divide it between the elements of music. Technique on your instrument, theory, harmony, time, rhythm, and the other thing that the working musician needs is good reading, sight reading. Alright, remember dudes, it's all about the music. My condolences to the amazing Australian Wallabies. You didn't win the World Cup. You could have, but the All Blacks are just too deep in every position. Alright, peace guys. Take care.